Hi guys, and welcome to the second video on Capture Recapture. We've covered the first 3 or 4 marks of a Capture Recapture question. Now we're going to look at the final 1, 2 or 3 marks. So this is a really good place we can attack marks, get as many marks as we can in paper 2. And I'm just going to go through some of the possible questions for possible variations they could ask you after you've done a question like this. So for the purposes of this video, I'm still going to be referring to this experiment, Hannah catching the fish. So this will be a part A. We're going to look at the form that part B, maybe even part C, could take if part C does exist. So part B, most likely, and probably the nicest question you could be asked is, what assumptions have we made? Okay, for this to be true, for our estimate of 300 to be accurate, what assumptions would I have made? Okay, so what assumptions have I made? So I've seen questions where you've been asked for one of these assumptions, sometimes 2 assumptions. That's probably the most common variation. But we're just going to have a look at some that I thought of, and I think it pretty much covers all possible experiments. So, very first thing, I've put these as 1 point because I feel like they are very similar, they are all related. So you've got to say that the sample is random, that should say on both days. In fact, that should be after all of these. So on both days, the sample is random. On both days the same sampling method is used, and on both days the same bait is used. Now if that wasn't true, it wouldn't be a true reflection. If on the first day you used a really strong bait that this particular fish really liked, you're going to catch a lot more fish than on the second day. It's not going to be a true reflection. If you didn't actually fully randomize the fish, if you picked out marked ones as opposed to just a random sample and then saw how many are marked, you would probably, well, you would almost certainly get a wrong estimate. So it's really important that the sample is random on both days. Now there's a reason I've put that first, and you'll see why in a moment. Another assumption you can make is that some of the fish have migrated, or they've swam into the pond, or some were born overnight. So there's actually an increased number of fish in the pond on the second day compared to the first day. Obviously, if the number changes, that's not going to be a true estimate. The opposite of that is also true. It could be that some of the fish swam out of the pond, they left the pond, or that they died. If some of the fish have died, the number's gone down, so again, you're not going to have a true reflection of how many are in the pond. And the final one, the dye or the mark or whatever you were using wore off. Okay, I'd say they are the big 4 reasons you should be looking at. So obviously apply it to the context. It may not be about fish, it might be about insects, it might be even about something like sweets in a jar, I don't know. Make sure you're applying some context to it though, thinking about what could happen in those situations. So if part B is just for you to give a few of those assumptions, that's some easy marks for you. However, part B could say one of these things has happened, what effect? So what effect will these issues have? So we need to just think in a case-by-case basis what's happened, and I'm just going to go through what I would have to do if I'm asked a question like this. It's actually quite hard to work out on the spot, so I'm just going to go through the process I would have, or I would take to answer this question. So what I'm going to do is just copy down my answer to the original question again. Okay, so I'm just going to put it on the screen. You might want to pause it just to refresh your memory, but I'm just going to write down at the top in this space here the working out that I did. So this is on the first day, this is on the second day. And I said, well, I need to turn 10 into 50, so I times it by 5. So I need to do the same to the 60. So n is equal to 5 times 60, which is 300. So a question, to be honest, the only three you could be asked about, if the question was what effect will this certain issue have, would be these three here. So the question might say, some fish actually were born overnight. What effect will that have on your answer? It might be that some fish died overnight. Most likely what it's going to be is that some of the dye wore off. So we're just going to go through and work out what effect it will have. So just remember, this is what I did in the experiment, but we might be told the experiment wasn't accurate, it wasn't fair, it didn't give a good estimation of the number of fish in the pond. So what I would always do, and what I always have to do with these questions, is imagine what would actually happen to these numbers if this thing happened. So what would happen if some of the fish were born? So I'd still have caught 50 fish on the first day out of how many there are on the second day. But on the second day, if I caught a sample of fish, I might still catch 10 that were marked, but I might only have 50 in my net, or 40 or 30. The good thing about this, it doesn't matter what the number is. Let's just go 30, because there are fewer fish in the pond, fewer swam into my net on the second day. But there were still 10 that were marked. Okay, that could happen. You could assume that the extra 30 fish were all born overnight. Okay, so that is what would truly have happened if those fish weren't born. You'd have got 10 out of 30 marked fish. So you would still be timesing 10 by 5 to get 50, but you'd be timesing 30 by 5 to get n. So you would have n is equal to 30 times 5, or 150. So in the case that some fish swam into the pond overnight, the true number would be 150 fish, whereas our estimate in this experiment that's gone wrong is 300. So that means that if some fish swim into the pond overnight, you have overestimated the number of fish. Okay, what if some of the fish left the pond, or that they died overnight? So again, I'm just going to go through what could have happened. So 50 out of n fish were caught, but what if some of my marked fish, some of those 50 marked fish died overnight, and I only caught 10 the next day? Well, if they hadn't have died, I might have caught, I don't know, 25 fish out of 60. So I would need to think, how would I turn 25 into 50? Well, I times it by 2. I'd have to times it by a smaller number. That means I would also have to times 60 by a smaller number as well. So my n would be 120. So if some of the fish have died, it would probably be an overestimate as well. Okay, I've said there were 300, but in reality there are actually only 120. Okay, so these two I would say are the least likely to come up, because there is a lot of thinking that goes on here, and also it's a little bit unclear. If fish have swum into the pond or they've died, are we talking about the estimate before they died, before they were born, or after they died or were born? Okay, so that is a little bit confusing, which is why I think this is the most likely one that is going to come up. The dye wore off. So I would be thinking, so I caught 50 fish on the first day out of n, and on the second day, unbeknown to me, the dye had worn off, and 10 of my fish were marked out of 60. Now it could be that I caught 30 fish that were originally marked, but the dye wore off 20 of them. So I could say, I shall choose some easier numbers. I could just have imagined 15 fish had their dye worn off. So it's quite similar to the last example, sorry, in that I just need to think, well, what do I have to do to 25 to get 50? I times it by 2, that means I need to times 60 by 2 as well. So my n would be 120. So if the die wears off, I've actually overestimated how many fish are in my pond. So that's a little bit harder because you do need to be thinking, but the maths isn't necessary. If you just have a reason and you can put that into a clear, concise sentence, you'll be okay. But putting the numbers in, just imagining what would happen in the real world to those numbers makes it a lot easier to imagine. So I was thinking, and the only example I could come up with to get an underestimate, you'll notice all of these are overestimates, is this final one here. So this could come up. So it's a similar idea. I'm just going to imagine this actually happened. So Hannah actually counted some of the marked fish twice on the second day. How did this affect her answer? So on the first day, she still caught 50 out of n fish. And on the second day, she said she caught 10 out of 60, 10 out of 60 of the fish that she caught were marked. Well, if she counted some of them twice, there would actually be fewer fish. So let's just imagine she counted every single one of those fish twice. She's just not very good at counting. So let's just pretend there were actually 5 out of 60 marked fish. So instead of having 10 out of 60, it might turn out, if Hannah's miscounted, that there were only 5 out of 60 marked fish. So you would need to think, what do I have to do to 5 to turn it into 50? I'll times it by 10. So I need to do the same to the bottom. So 5 times 10 is 50, 60 times 10 is going to give me my n, my number of fish in the pond, the true number, which would be 600. So originally Hannah said there were 300, but it turns out there were actually 600. That means she underestimated her answer. So just as a quick recap, if you were asked for a reason, you should choose one of these 4, or 2 of these 4, depending on how many you were asked for in the question. You could be asked, like I said, the hardest combination would be saying that some of the fish actually died overnight. How would that affect your answer? But that's unlikely to come up. But it's always good to see some of the harder examples, so that if the question is easier, you will definitely be able to answer it. So I think this is quite a likely question to come up, the die wearing off, and hopefully the maths does make sense there. But there were actually 25 fish that were died, but we thought there were only 10, so it was an overestimate. Or they could say, Hannah's actually miscounted, what effect does it have on our answer? So I know that seems like, I know this has been a 13-minute video now, to get 2 or 3 marks, but we know the format of the question, we know it's going to look like this, so it's really worth going over and making sure you get as close to 4 marks on those questions as possible. I hope this has been helpful for you guys, and I will see you later.